My husband and his brother thought it was hilarious to prank me by leaving me stranded at a gas station 500 miles from home. They laughed as they drove off, yelling, "Good luck out the window," while my sister-in-law filmed it for her social media. I never went back. 3 years later, my husband found me in a corporate boardroom in Manhattan. The smile vanished from his face when he saw who was standing behind me. But before I tell you how I destroyed his life, let me tell you where I am watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the person who paid the bills while everyone else took the credit. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I was standing in the middle of a scorching Nevada parking lot watching the taillights of a rented Cadillac Escalade disappear into a cloud of red dust. The taste of grit was already in my teeth. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the logistics warehouse in Phoenix when my husband Darius pulled up with his brother Malik and Malik's wife Ashley. They told me to get in because we were going to Las Vegas for the weekend. I was wearing my steel toe boots, my high-visibility vest, and a pair of cargo pants covered in warehouse dust. I tried to say no. I told them I was tired and needed to shower, but Ashley just rolled her eyes from the front seat. She looked immaculate, as always, wearing a designer tracksuit that I knew for a fact she had put on a credit card that was maxed out. She told me to stop being a buzzkill and just get in the car because I was ruining the vibe. I sat in the back seat for 2 hours listening to them blast music and talk about the VIP tables they planned to book. When we stopped at this rundown gas station on the border of Arizona and Nevada, Darius told me to run inside and grab everyone water. I stepped out of the air-conditioned luxury of the SUV, and the heat hit me like a physical blow. It was 100 degrees and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I walked into the convenience store, bought 4 large bottles of water with the $20 bill I had crumpled in my pocket, and walked back out. That was when I heard the engine rever. The black Cadillac was slowly rolling forward. I jogged toward it thinking Darius was just repositioning the car near the air pump. But then he accelerated. I dropped the water bottles and started running. My heavy work boots slammed against the asphalt. I grabbed the door handle of the back seat, but it was locked. I banged on the tinted glass. Inside, I could see them clearly. Darius was laughing, his head thrown back against the headrest. Malik was in the back seat holding up his phone, recording my panicked face as I tried to keep up with the moving vehicle. But it was Ashley in the front seat who broke my heart. She rolled down the window just enough to let the cold air hit my sweating face. She looked me up and down with that familiar sneer she reserved for anything she considered beneath her. She shouted, "Run, Nia, run! Maybe you can burn off some of that warehouse smell if you sprint hard enough. You look ridiculous. You do not fit the aesthetic of this trip anyway. Look at you. You are dusty. You are embarrassing us." Darius shouted from the driver's seat that it was just a prank and I needed to learn how to take a joke. He told me to catch an Uber and meet them at the hotel. Then he floored it. The massive SUV kicked up a storm of gravel that stung my cheeks. I stood there in the middle of nowhere watching them leave. I waited for brake lights. I waited for them to turn around. I waited for 5 minutes, then 10. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and terrifying. I reached for my back pocket to grab my phone, but my hand hit empty fabric. My purse was in the back seat of the car. My wallet, my ID, my iPhone, everything was in that bag. Panic started to claw at my throat. I patted my other pockets frantically. In the side pocket of my cargo pants, I felt a hard rectangular object. It was the rugged work phone I used at the warehouse to track shipments. I had forgotten to turn it in at the end of my shift. I pulled it out. The screen was cracked and dim. It showed 4% battery and searching for signal. I looked around. The gas station was essentially abandoned. The clerk inside had locked the door and flipped the sign to closed the moment I walked out. There were no other cars, just me, the empty highway, and the setting sun. I walked out to the edge of the road, holding the phone up like an offering to the sky. 1 bar of signal flickered on. I dialed Darius. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, the call connected. I heard the deafening sound of club music and people shouting. He had put me on speakerphone. I could hear the wind rushing past their open windows. Darius, I screamed into the phone. You have to come back. This is not funny. I have no money. I have no water. Turn the car around right now. I heard Ashley's voice cut through the noise. She sounded bored and annoyed. She asked Darius why he was even answering the phone. She said I was ruining the mood again with my drama. Darius laughed a cruel sound that made my stomach turn. He told me to stop whining. He said I was a grown woman who managed a warehouse, so I should be able to manage getting a ride. He said I was too uptight, and that was why he needed this trip to relax. He told me I was acting like a child, and that if I wanted to be part of the high-class lifestyle he was trying to build, I needed to stop acting so desperate. Ashley chimed in again. She told me I looked like the help in my work clothes, and that she did not want to be seen walking into the Bellagio with someone who looked like they just scrubbed floors. She said I should take the time to reflect on my presentation. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and angry. I told them I was going to die out here. I told them it was getting dark. Darius just sighed. He said they were almost to Vegas and he was not turning around now because they had a reservation. He told me to figure it out and that he would leave a room key at the front desk if I managed to make it there by tomorrow. Then he hung up. The line went dead. I stared at the screen as the battery icon turned red, and then the phone shut down completely. The silence that followed was absolute. Night falls fast in the desert. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. I huddled against the brick wall of the closed gas station, trying to shield myself from the wind. I was shivering, but my mind was burning with a clarity I had never possessed before. For the last 5 years, I had been the engine of our family. I worked 60 hours a week, managing supply chains and inventory, while Darius played business owner with a trucking company that barely broke even. I paid the mortgage. I paid the car notes on the Escalade they were driving. I paid for Ashley's designer bags because Darius said we had to help family look good. They called me Dusty because I wore work boots and saved money. They called themselves high class because they spent my money on logos and bottle service. I sat there in the dark hugging my knees, and I realized something that made me nauseous. They did not just leave me here as a joke. They left me here because they genuinely believed I was disposable. I was the mule that carried their lifestyle, and they were ashamed of me because I sweated while I did it. Hours passed. My thirst became a physical pain. I heard coyotes howling in the distance and saw shadows moving in the brush. I was terrified, but beneath the fear was a cold, hard rage that was slowly solidifying into a plan. Around 2 in the morning, blinding lights swept across the parking lot. The deep rumble of a diesel engine shook the ground. An 18-wheeler was pulling off the highway. It was a massive rig chrome gleaming under the moonlight. I stood up, my legs stiff and cramping. This was it. Either I was going to be saved, or I was going to encounter the kind of danger my mother always warned me about. But I had no choice. I walked into the light. The driver opened his door and stepped down. He was an older black man with gray hair and a face etched with lines of exhaustion. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans. He looked at me, a woman alone in the desert in the middle of the night, and his expression softened from suspicion to concern. He asked me if I was okay. I shook my head. I told him my ride left me. I did not tell him it was my husband. I was too ashamed. He did not ask questions. He just opened the passenger door and told me to hop in. He said he was heading to a distribution center in Phoenix and could drop me off in the city. I climbed up into the cab. It smelled like coffee and old leather. It was the safest place I had ever been. As we drove through the night, I watched the desert roll by. I looked at my hands, rough from moving pallets and checking inventory. On my left ring finger sat the diamond solitaire Darius had given me. He told me it cost him 3 months of salary. He told me it was flawless, just like his love for me. It was the one thing I held on to when things got hard, the proof that he valued me. I twisted it around my finger. When the driver dropped me off in downtown Phoenix, the sun was just coming up. I thanked him and tried to offer him the $20 bill I had left, but he pushed it away and told me to get myself a hot meal. I stood on the sidewalk as the city woke up. I had no ID, no phone, and $20. I walked past a pawn shop that was just opening its metal grates. A sign in the window said, "We buy gold and diamonds." I looked at my ring again. If it was real, it was worth at least $5,000. That would be enough to get a hotel, buy a new phone, and figure out my next move. I walked inside. The broker was a man who looked like he had seen everything. I took off the ring and placed it on the velvet counter. I asked him how much he could give me for it. He put a jeweler's loupe to his eye and examined it for less than 10 seconds. He put it down and looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He told me he could give me $50 for the gold band, but the stone was worthless. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked him to check again. I told him my husband said it was a certified diamond. The broker laughed a dry, harsh sound. He told me it was cubic zirconia and not even a good one. He said it was the kind of ring you buy at a mall kiosk for $200. He scratched the stone with a file to prove it. A deep gouge appeared on the surface. Diamonds do not scratch. I stood there staring at the ruined fake stone. The final lie. Darius had not just abandoned me in the desert. He had been lying to me every single day of our marriage. He let me work double shifts to pay for his brother's mortgage while he bought me a piece of glass and told me it was a treasure. He let Ashley mock my clothes while she carried a purse bought with my overtime pay. The realization hit me so hard I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. I sold the ring. I took the $50. Combined with my $20, I had $70 to my name. I walked out of that pawn shop and I felt lighter. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was a cold, calculating determination. I found a public library and used their computer. I logged into my social media accounts not to post, but to look. I found Ashley's Instagram profile. It was public, of course. She had posted a story 3 hours ago. It was a video of her, Darius, and Malik at a pool party in Vegas. They were holding bottles of champagne. Darius was wearing a gold chain I had bought him for his birthday. The caption read, "Removing negative energy from our circle. Only high vibrations allowed." There was no mention of me. No plea for help. No missing person report. They were not looking for me. They assumed I would eventually find a way home, tail between my legs, begging for forgiveness for ruining their trip. Or maybe they just did not care if I ever came back. I sat there in that quiet library and made a decision. Nia, the dutiful wife, was dead. She died at that gas station. The woman sitting in this chair was someone else. I knew the logistics industry inside and out. I knew how to move things, how to hide things, and how to track things. I knew where the money was. I went to the bathroom and cut my hair off with a pair of craft scissors I had in my pocket. I washed my face. I walked out of the library and headed toward the industrial district. There was an Amazon fulfillment center hiring walk-in workers for the night shift. No questions asked, cash pay for the first week. I did not go home. I did not call the police. I let them have the house. I let them have the bank accounts which I knew were already drained because I was the only one filling them. I disappeared into the underbelly of the supply chain world. For 6 months I lived in a shelter and worked 18 hours a day loading trucks. I ate canned beans and saved every single dollar. I listened to the drivers, learned the routes, and spotted the inefficiencies that cost companies millions. I was not just a worker, I was a student of the system. One afternoon, 6 months after I vanished, I saw a regional director from a massive logistics firm touring the floor. He was shouting at a manager because a shipment of medical supplies was delayed. I knew exactly why it was delayed. It was a routing error in the software that nobody on the floor knew how to bypass. I walked right up to him. I was wearing a safety vest and carrying a clipboard. I interrupted him and told him I could fix his problem in 10 minutes if he gave me terminal access. He looked at me like I was crazy. But he was desperate. He gave me the login. 8 minutes later, the trucks were moving. He asked me who I was. I looked him in the eye and gave him a fake name. I told him I needed a job in operations, not loading trucks. He hired me on the spot. That was the first step. I moved up fast. I worked harder than anyone else because I had nothing else to lose. I had no family, no husband, no home. I was a ghost, fueled by the memory of taillights fading in the desert. 2 years later, I was living in New York City. I was the chief operating officer of Nexus Global, a supply chain startup that was disrupting the entire shipping industry. I wore tailored suits that fit me like armor. I walked into boardrooms dominated by men who had never lifted a box in their lives, and I commanded their attention because I knew the business from the concrete up. It was at a venture capital summit in San Francisco that I met Julian Sterling. He was a billionaire investor known for being ruthless. He was looking for companies to acquire. I was pitching Nexus for a Series B funding round. He tried to tear apart my presentation, questioning my projections. I did not flinch. I corrected his math in front of 300 people. I showed him where his own portfolio companies were bleeding money in their supply chains. The room went silent. Julian looked at me for a long moment, then he smiled. It was the first time a man had looked at me with genuine respect, not because of what I could do for him, but because of who I was. Julian and I started working together. He was fascinated by my story, though I only gave him the broad strokes. He did not care about my pedigree or my background. He cared about my mind. We became partners, then friends, and eventually something more. He taught me how to weaponize my capital. I taught him how to see value where others saw dirt. We were building an empire together, and part of my job was identifying distressed assets to buy cheap and turn around. 3 years after the gas station incident, I was sitting in my corner office in Manhattan, overlooking the Hudson River. My assistant walked in with a file of potential acquisitions for our logistics division. I opened the folder. On top of the stack was a small trucking company based in Phoenix. It was drowning in debt, facing multiple lawsuits for safety violations, and on the verge of bankruptcy. The owner was listed as Darius Vance. My heart stopped for a second, then started beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. I looked at the financial statements. Darius had run the company into the ground without me there to manage the books. He had taken out predatory loans to maintain his lifestyle. He was months away from losing everything. And he was looking for a buyout. He was looking for a savior. I picked up my phone and called Julian. I told him I found a company we needed to acquire. I told him to set up a meeting in New York. I told him to bring the full legal team. Then I told my assistant to send a first-class plane ticket to Darius Vance and his partners. I wanted them here in person. I wanted them to feel special. I wanted them to think they had won the lottery. When Darius and Ashley walked into the lobby of Nexus Global 2 weeks later, they looked exactly the same, yet somehow cheaper. They were wearing flashy clothes that screamed new money, but I could see the fraying seams. They were loud, rude to the receptionist, and taking selfies in the waiting area. They had no idea that the woman they were coming to meet, the mysterious investor who was going to save their miserable lives, was the same woman they had left to die in the desert. I watched them on the security monitor from my office. Ashley was complaining that the coffee was not organic. Darius was bragging to a security guard about his business empire. Malik was asleep in a chair. I adjusted my silk blazer. I checked my reflection. The dusty woman in cargo pants was gone. The woman looking back at me was worth $50 million. I spun my chair around to face the window so my back would be to the door when they entered. I wanted to hear their voices one last time before I ended them. The door to the conference room opened. I heard their footsteps on the plush carpet. I heard Darius clear his throat. "Good morning," he said using his best salesman voice. "We are honored to be here. I am Darius Vance, CEO of Vance Logistics, and this is my wife Ashley, my Chief Marketing Officer." Wife? So he had declared me dead or divorced me in absentia to marry her. Or maybe she was just using the title. It did not matter. We are here to sign the exclusive partnership deal, Ashley added, her voice dripping with entitlement. But I must say we are very busy people, so we would appreciate it if we could wrap this up quickly. We have a dinner reservation at Nobu. I smiled at my reflection in the glass. They were still the same, still prioritizing dinner reservations over reality. I understand, I said, my voice low and calm, still facing the window. Time is money. And you two seem to be out of both. The silence in the room was sudden and heavy. Excuse me, Darius asked, his voice wavering slightly. Do we know each other? I slowly spun my chair around. I rested my elbows on the mahogany table and interlaced my fingers. I looked Darius dead in the eyes. Hello, husband, I said. Did you enjoy your trip to Vegas? Darius dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a loud thud. His mouth opened but no sound came out. His face went from confident to pale gray in a split second. Ashley let out a strangled gasp and grabbed Malik's arm. Malik looked like he was seeing a ghost. Nia, Darius whispered. You are dead. We thought you were dead. Disappointed, I asked. I bet it is hard to cash a life insurance policy when you do not have a body. Ashley stepped forward, her face twisting into a snarl. You? She screeched. You ungrateful little... Where have you been? We were worried sick, you ran away, you abandoned your family. I abandoned you. I laughed. It was a cold sound that echoed off the glass walls. You left me in a desert with no water and laughed about it. But let's not dwell on the past. Let's talk about the future. Specifically, your future. I opened the file on the table. You are here to sell your company, I said. You think you are getting a $2 million buyout. That is what the offer letter said, right? Darius nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. Yes. Look, Nia baby. I don't know how you got here. Maybe you're the secretary or something, but we can talk about us later. Right now I need to close this deal with your boss. I can cut you in. I can give you some cash. Just don't mess this up for me. My boss. I raised an eyebrow. Darius, look at the name on the building. Nexus. Nexus. Naya's Export and United Supply. I am not the secretary. I am the owner. Darius looked around the room at the expensive art, the view of the skyline, the team of lawyers standing silently in the corner. The realization hit him like a truck. No, he stammered. You worked in a warehouse. You are dusty. I was dusty because I was building the foundation you were standing on, I said. But now, I am the one holding the sledgehammer. I slid a single piece of paper across the long table. This is not a purchase agreement, I said. This is a notice of debt acquisition. I bought your loans, Darius. All of them. The bank was happy to sell them to me for pennies on the dollar because you haven't made a payment in 6 months. I own your trucks. I own your warehouse. I own your house. And Ashley, I own that fake Louis Vuitton bag you are holding because you put it as collateral on a business loan. Ashley clutched her bag to her chest. You can't do this. We are family. Family picks you up at the gas station, I said. Creditors do not. Just then the door opened again. Julian walked in. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Darius's entire company. He walked straight to me, put a hand on my shoulder, and kissed my cheek. Is everything in order, darling? He asked. Darius looked at Julian, then at me. Who is this? This is my fiancé, Julian said, looking at Darius like he was a bug on his shoe. And you must be the mistake she made in her 20s. We are legally married, Darius shouted, trying to regain some dominance. Half of this is mine. New York is an equitable distribution state. If you made this money while we were married, I am entitled to it. I smiled. I thought you might say that. That is why I had my lawyers look into your filing status. You filed taxes as single for the last 3 years to claim more deductions. You committed perjury on federal documents stating we were divorced to get a loan, And you married Ashley in a ceremony in Mexico last year, didn't you? Bigamy is a felony, Darius. Darius sank into a chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. What do you want? He asked. I want you to sign over the company, I said. I want you to vacate my house within 24 hours. And I want you to walk out of here and figure out how to get back to Arizona, because I just had your rental car towed for parking in my spot. You are stranding us in New York, Ashley screamed. We have no money. How are we supposed to get home? I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city I had conquered. Good luck, I said without turning around. Security escorted them out. I watched from the window as they stood on the sidewalk, arguing, pointing fingers, and looking for a bus stop. They looked very small from up here. I felt Julian's hand in mine. I squeezed it. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt clean. I had scrubbed off the dust. 6 months of silence had turned me into a different person. Phoenix was not just a city, it was a furnace that burned away the soft edges of the woman I used to be. I was no longer Nia, the wife who begged for affection. I was employee number 492 at a massive fulfillment center on the edge of the desert. My life had shrunk to a 10-hour loop of scanning, lifting, and loading. I lived in a room I rented for $300 a month from an elderly woman who asked no questions. I ate rice and beans. I walked to work. I did not speak unless spoken to. I was invisible, and for a long time that was exactly what I wanted. I was terrified that Darius or the police would find me, even though deep down I knew nobody was looking. The warehouse was a beast that never slept. It was a cacophony of conveyor belts, hydraulic lifts, and the constant beep of scanners. Most people hated it. They hated the quotas and the heat and the aching feet. But I found a strange comfort in the rhythm. It was logical. Box A goes to chute B. It made sense in a way my marriage never had. But my brain, the brain that had managed complex supply chains for Darius's ungrateful company, was starving. I saw the inefficiencies everywhere. I saw how the floor layout added 30 seconds to every pick. I saw how the loading dock bottlenecks cost thousands of dollars an hour. I kept my mouth shut. I just wanted my paycheck. I just wanted to survive. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was peak season, the weeks leading up to the holidays, when the volume of packages tripled. The air in the facility was thick with tension. Drivers were screaming at dock workers. Supervisors were sweating through their shirts. And then the system crashed. Not the computers, but the flow. A routing error in the main sorting algorithm had sent 5,000 units to a loading bay that was already full. The conveyor belts jammed, sensors started screaming, the entire outbound line ground to a halt. I stood by my station holding a package of toy blocks. I watched as the floor managers ran around like headless chickens. The site leader, a man named Marcus, who usually sat in an air-conditioned office overlooking the floor, came running down the stairs. He was red in the face. He was shouting at the shift supervisors to manually reroute the packages, but they were paralyzed. The boxes were piling up. The trucks outside were idling, burning fuel, and missing delivery windows. It was a logistical nightmare. It was a $1 million mistake happening in real time. I looked at the jam. I knew exactly what was wrong. They were trying to clear the blockage from the front, but the pressure from the back was too high. They needed to reverse the flow on the secondary belt and divert the incoming volume to the overflow holding area, even though it wasn't designated for outbound shipping. It was a violation of standard protocol, but it was the only way to clear the gridlock without shutting down the entire facility for 3 hours. I gripped the package in my hands. I told myself to stay quiet. I told myself I was just a packer. I told myself it wasn't my problem. But the professional pride I thought I had buried in the desert flared up. I could not watch this incompetence. It physically hurt me to see the system fail when the solution was staring them in the face. I dropped the package. I walked out of my lane. I ignored the supervisor who yelled at me to get back to work. I walked straight up to Marcus. He was on a radio screaming at someone in IT. He looked at me like I was a bug. He told me to get back on the line or I was fired. I did not flinch. I looked him in the eye and spoke with a voice I hadn't used in 6 months. I told him to shut up and listen. I told him that IT couldn't fix a physical bottleneck. I pointed to the secondary belt. I told him to reverse the motor on line 4 and divert the flow to the staging area in Zone C. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I explained that Zone C was empty because the inbound shift hadn't started yet. We could use that empty space as a temporary buffer to clear the main jam. He hesitated. The alarms were still blaring. He looked at the chaos, then he looked at me. He saw the grease on my face and the dust on my clothes, but he also saw something else. He saw certainty. He keyed his radio. He gave the order. The floor fell silent as the motors whined and reversed. The flow of boxes shifted. The pressure on the main line eased. Within 10 minutes, the jam was cleared. The belt started moving forward again. The trucks outside started loading. The crisis was over. I turned around and walked back to my station. I picked up the package of toy blocks and scanned it. I went back to work. My heart was hammering in my chest. I had exposed myself. I had shown them I was not just a pair of hands. I was terrified I would be fired for insubordination. An hour later, Marcus tapped me on the shoulder. He didn't yell. He asked me to follow him to his office. I thought this was it. I thought I was going back to the streets. I walked into the glass-walled office and stood with my hands clasped behind my back. He sat behind his desk and looked at my employee file on his screen. He asked me who I really was. He said Packers didn't know about flow diversion and buffer zones. I lied. I told him I used to work in a warehouse back east before bad luck hit me. I kept it vague. I kept my eyes low. He leaned back in his chair. He told me he didn't care about my past. He cared that I just saved the facility a fortune in late fees. He told me he needed a new shift lead for the night crew. It paid $5 more an hour. It meant I wouldn't be lifting boxes anymore. I would be managing the flow. I took the job. That $5 an hour was life-changing. It meant I could buy fresh vegetables. It meant I could save for a car. But more than that, it was the first crack in the wall I had built around myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was climbing. The next few weeks were a blur of new responsibilities. I took the night shift and ran it with military precision. I reorganized the staging area. I created a new color-coded system for the loaders that increased efficiency by 15%. The other workers listened to me because I didn't shout. I knew what it was like to lift those boxes. I treated them with respect and they worked hard for me. I started staying late, not to work, but to learn. I watched how the upper management tracked metrics. I learned the software systems they used. I absorbed everything. I realized that the skills I had used to keep Darius's pathetic little trucking company afloat were actually high-level logistics management skills. He had convinced me I was nothing, just a helper, but in reality, I was the architect. My bank account started to grow. It wasn't much, just a few $1,000s, but it was mine. It was money that nobody could take away from me to buy a fake purse or pay a gambling debt. I bought a laptop from a pawn shop. I started taking online courses in advanced supply chain management. I sat in my small room at night, the desert wind rattling the window, and I studied. I wasn't studying to get a degree. I was studying to build a weapon. My mind was sharp, and for the first time in years it was working for me. One night, 6 months into my new role, I was walking the floor when I saw a discrepancy in the shipping manifest. A vendor was consistently underreporting weight to save on shipping costs. It was a small amount per box, but over thousands of shipments it was costing the company millions. I did the math. I wrote a report. I didn't give it to Marcus. I knew he would take credit for it. I found the email address for the regional director of operations, a woman named Elena Rodriguez, who covered the entire Southwest. I sent the email at 3 in the morning. I attached my spreadsheets. I detailed the fraud and the solution. I hit send and felt a jolt of electricity. I was playing a dangerous game. I was bypassing the chain of command. But I was done playing small. I was done waiting for permission. 2 days later, a black sedan pulled up to the warehouse. Elena Rodriguez walked onto the floor. She was wearing a tailored suit and heels that clicked sharply on the concrete. She walked straight past Marcus. She asked for the night shift lead. She asked for me. She looked at me standing there in my safety vest with a clipboard in my hand. She didn't ask me about my past. She held up my report. She asked me if I was sure about the numbers. I looked her in the eye and told her I was never wrong about the numbers. She smiled. It was a shark smile, sharp and approving. She told me to pack my things. She said I was wasted on the floor. She needed someone in her operations team in regional HQ. I walked out of that warehouse that day, and I never looked back. I left the safety vest on the hook. I left the fear in the locker. I got into my used Honda Civic that I had bought with my savings, and I drove toward the city skyline. I was not just Nia the survivor anymore. I was Nia the professional. And I was just getting started. I had a long way to go to get to the top, but I knew the path now. And I knew that somewhere out there, Darius and Ashley were still posting photos of their fake life, completely unaware that the woman they left in the dust was coming for everything. New York City was a different beast entirely. It did not just hum, it vibrated with a frequency that rattled your bones. I had traded the suffocating heat of the Arizona desert for the concrete canyons of Manhattan, and the energy shift was exactly what I needed. Elena Rodriguez had kept her word. She saw something in me that day on the warehouse floor, a hunger that matched her own. She recommended me for a position as a junior supply chain analyst at Sterling & Co., a massive logistics conglomerate headquartered in Midtown. It was an entry-level role on paper, the kind of job filled by Ivy League graduates with soft hands and theoretical knowledge. I was the anomaly. I was the hire that made HR raise their eyebrows. But I treated that cubicle like it was the cockpit of a fighter jet. I arrived at 6 in the morning when the cleaning crews were still vacuuming the plush carpets, and I left at 10 at night when the city lights were the only things keeping me company. I devoured data. I learned the language of corporate power, which was far more subtle and dangerous than the shouting matches on the warehouse dock. I learned that silence in a boardroom was a weapon and that a spreadsheet could destroy a man faster than a fist. I kept my head down. I wore the sensible discount clothes I had bought in Phoenix, blending into the beige walls. To my colleagues, I was just the quiet woman in the corner who always had the reports ready early. They did not know I was analyzing their mistakes. They did not know I was mapping the entire company's infrastructure in my head, looking for the cracks. The company was in the middle of a massive headline-grabbing merger. We were acquiring a European shipping giant called Atlantica. It was the deal of the decade, a multi-billion-dollar marriage that was supposed to make Sterling & Co. the undisputed king of the Atlantic trade routes. Champagne was already on ice. The partners were picking out new vacation homes in the Hamptons. The office buzzed with a manic celebratory energy, but as I was running the routine due diligence on the fuel surcharge projections for the upcoming quarter, I saw a glitch. It was a small discrepancy in the operational expense column of Atlantica's ledger. Most analysts would have glossed over it as a rounding error or a currency conversion variance. But my brain, wired by months of tracking missing pallets and catching driver theft, latched onto it. The numbers were too perfect. They were linear in a fuel market that had been historically volatile for the last 18 months. I dug deeper. I pulled the raw shipping manifest from the last 3 quarters, bypassing the summarized reports the executives were reading. I cross-referenced them with global fuel indices and Port Authority records from Rotterdam and Hamburg. It took me 3 nights of zero sleep, living on vending machine coffee and adrenaline, but I found it. Atlantica was hiding a massive liability. They had locked into long-term fuel contracts at peak prices right before the market crashed, a disastrous bet that was bleeding cash on every single nautical mile. To cover it up, they were routing the losses through a shell company that billed the fuel costs as consulting fees and logistical support. If Sterling & Co. bought them, we would not just be buying ships. We would be buying a $2 billion anchor that would drag us straight to the bottom of the ocean. The company would be insolvent within 2 years. I took my findings to my direct manager, a man named Brad, who spent more time working on his fantasy football league than looking at spreadsheets. He laughed at me. He didn't even look at the data. He told me I was a junior analyst who didn't understand the complexities of creative accounting. He told me to stay in my lane and focus on optimizing warehouse shelf space. He said the deal was done, the bonuses were already allocated, and if I made noise, I would be back in the mailroom before lunch. I walked out of his office and I felt that same cold clarity I had felt at the gas station 3 years ago. Brad was Darius in a better suit. He was dismissive, he was arrogant, he thought I was small, he thought I was dusty, and he was wrong. The board of directors was voting on the acquisition the next morning at 9 o'clock. I knew Brad wouldn't pass my report up the chain. He wanted his performance bonus from the merger too badly. I had a choice. I could stay quiet, keep my safe job, and watch the company slowly sink. Or I could burn the bridge to save the castle. I chose the fire. I stayed in the office all night. I turned my raw data into a 10-page executive summary that was bulletproof. I made graphs that were undeniable. I made projections that showed the bankruptcy timeline in red ink. At 8:45 in the morning, I walked to the executive elevator. My badge didn't have clearance for the penthouse floor. I waited. When the CEO's executive assistant stepped in with a tray of coffees, I slipped in behind her. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face was stone. I was wearing my cheap polyester slacks and a blouse that had been washed too many times, but I walked with the stride of a queen. The boardroom doors were mahogany and heavy. I could hear the murmur of confident male voices inside. I didn't knock. I pushed them open. 20 men and women in $5,000 suits turned to look at me. The CEO, a formidable man named Arthur Sterling, stopped mid-sentence. Brad was there sitting in the back row. His face went white. I didn't apologize. I didn't stutter. I walked straight to the head of the table and placed my report in front of Arthur Sterling. I told him he needed to read page 3 before he signed anything. I told him Atlantica was cooking the books. I told him the fuel contracts were a death sentence. The room erupted. Brad jumped up shouting that I was a rogue employee, that I was incompetent, that security should be called. Arthur held up a single hand. The room went silent instantly. He put on his reading glasses. He read page 3. Then he read page 4. He looked up at the CFO. He asked a specific question about the fuel hedging strategy in the third quarter. The CFO started to sweat. He couldn't answer. The silence stretched heavy and dangerous. Arthur looked at me. He asked me how I found this. I told him I looked at the numbers nobody else wanted to see because they were too busy celebrating. I told him I knew what it cost to move a container from Hamburg to New York down to the cent, and Atlantica's math was a fairy tale. The vote was canceled. An emergency audit was launched immediately. By noon, the deal was dead. By 2 o'clock, Brad was fired for gross negligence and failure to supervise. By 4 o'clock, I was called into Arthur Sterling's office. I thought I was going to be fired for insubordination. Instead, Arthur poured me a glass of water. He told me I had saved the company $2 billion. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted a position where I could make decisions, not just suggestions. I told him I wanted to lead the North American Operations Division. It was a role usually reserved for people with 20 years of experience. I had less than 2. He looked at me for a long time. He saw the hunger. He saw the competence. He saw the steel spine that the desert had forged. He gave me the job. He also gave me a signing bonus that was more money than Darius had made in his entire life. That evening, I walked out of the building and into the humid New York dusk. I caught my reflection in the glass facade of the skyscraper. The woman looking back was still wearing the sensible slacks. She looked tired. She looked small. But she was holding a check that could buy a small island. I hailed a cab. I told the driver to take me to Madison Avenue. I walked into a high-end boutique, the kind with a security guard at the door and no price tags on the clothes. The sales assistants looked at my cheap shoes and hesitated. I pulled out my new corporate credit card, the black one with my name embossed in silver. I told them I needed a new wardrobe. I needed armor. I spent 3 hours in that store. I tried on silk blouses that felt like water against my skin. I tried on Italian wool blazers with shoulders sharp enough to cut glass. I tried on stilettos that changed the way I walked, forcing me to stand tall, forcing me to command the space I occupied. I bought it all. I didn't look at the totals. I wasn't spending money. I was investing in a weapon. I went to a salon next. It was late, but money opens doors. I told the stylist to cut my hair. No more hiding behind messy buns or practical ponytails. I wanted a sharp, angular bob that framed my face like a helmet of war. I wanted to look like I meant business because I did. When she spun the chair around, I gasped. The dusty girl from the warehouse was gone. The woman in the mirror was fierce. Her eyes were hard and bright. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. I walked out onto the street and the city seemed to bow to me. This was the birth of the boss lady. I wasn't just Nia anymore. I was a force of nature. I had climbed out of the dirt, and now I was standing on top of the world. I hailed a cab, but this time I didn't feel lucky to get a ride. I felt like the city was waiting for me. I went back to my small apartment, packed my few belongings in trash bags, and threw them out. I moved into a hotel suite that night. I stood at the window looking south towards where I knew Darius was probably still struggling to keep his pathetic lies afloat. I took a sip of champagne. I was ready. New York was mine now. And soon everything else would be too. 2 years had passed since I walked out of that boutique in New York with a new wardrobe and a new spine. The city of San Francisco was draped in fog as I stepped out of a black town car in front of the Fairmont Hotel. I smoothed the lapels of my cream-colored Tom Ford suit. It cost $4,000 and it fit me like a second skin. I was no longer the junior analyst who snuck into boardrooms. I was the vice president of North American operations for Sterling & Co., and I was about to walk into the lion's den. The Global Venture Capital Summit was where the money lived. It was a room filled with billionaires, tech moguls, and investors who could make or break a company with a single signature. I was there to represent our logistics division to prove that our recent turnaround was sustainable and not just a fluke of creative accounting. The air in the ballroom smelled of expensive cologne and old money. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and scanned the room. I was looking for one man, Julian Sterling. He was a legend in the industry, a distant cousin to the Arthur Sterling I worked for, but he operated in a different stratosphere. He ran Sterling Capital, a private equity firm known for hostile takeovers and ruthless efficiency. He was speaking on the main stage in 10 minutes. I found a seat near the front. Julian walked onto the stage without an introduction. He didn't need one. He was tall with sharp features and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. He wore a navy suit without a tie, projecting an air of casual dominance. He sat in the leather armchair and looked out at the audience of 500 people with an expression of mild boredom. The moderator asked him about the future of global supply chains. Julian leaned into the microphone. He said the industry was bloated. He said that logistics companies were hemorrhaging cash because they relied too heavily on human capital. He called the workforce inefficient, error-prone, and obsolete. He argued that full automation was the only path to profitability, and that any company investing in human training was throwing good money after bad. He spoke with the arrogance of a man who had never packed a box in his life. He spoke about people like they were broken cogs in a machine. I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. I thought about the men and women I had worked with in Phoenix. I thought about the drivers who slept in their cabs to make delivery windows. I thought about the packers whose hands bled during peak season. They were not obsolete. They were the backbone of the economy, and Julian Sterling was dismissing them as a rounding error. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, my hand was the first one up. A microphone runner found me. I stood up. The room went quiet. I felt hundreds of eyes on me assessing my suit, my posture, my worth. I looked directly at Julian. I told him his assessment was mathematically sound in a vacuum, but operationally disastrous in the real world. I cited the failure rates of fully automated distribution centers in high variability climates. I broke down the cost of downtime when a robotic arm fails versus the adaptability of a trained human crew. I used data from my own turnaround at Sterling & Co., where we had increased efficiency by 30%, not by firing people, but by optimizing their workflows and incentivizing accuracy. I spoke for 2 minutes straight. I did not stutter. I did not apologize. I dismantled his entire thesis with cold hard numbers. I finished by saying that betting against human resilience was the fastest way to lose $1 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. The moderator looked terrified. The audience held its breath, waiting for the titan on stage to crush me. Julian stared at me. His expression did not change. He did not look angry. He looked awake. For the first time since he walked on stage, the boredom was gone. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He asked me my name. I told him. He asked me for the specific variance rate I had quoted regarding the Phoenix distribution hub. I gave it to him down to the decimal point. He asked me how I calculated the ROI on human capital investment. I gave him the formula I had developed myself. He nodded once slowly. He said my math was interesting. Then he stood up and walked off the stage, ending the session 5 minutes early. The room erupted in whispers. I sat down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought I had just committed career suicide. I thought I had embarrassed the Sterling name in front of the most powerful man in the family. I tried to leave the ballroom quietly, intending to head back to my hotel and update my resume. As I reached the heavy double doors, a man in a black suit blocked my path. He was Julian's head of security. He told me Mr. Sterling requested a moment of my time. He did not phrase it as a question. I was led to a private suite on the top floor of the hotel. Julian was standing by the window looking out at the Golden Gate Bridge. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand. He turned when I entered. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His energy was intense, focused entirely on me. He didn't offer me a drink. He didn't ask me to sit. He looked at me with that same laser focus he had on stage. He told me that nobody had spoken to him like that in 10 years. He said that most people in his world were sycophants who agreed with whatever he said because they wanted his money. He said I was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I told him I was neither. I told him I was right. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He put his drink down. He told me he had looked up my file while I was coming up in the elevator. He knew about the Atlantic merger I had killed. He knew about my rapid ascent at Sterling & Co. He asked me where I learned to fight like that. I looked him in the eye. I didn't tell him about the gas station. I didn't tell him about the husband who threw me away. I told him I learned to fight because I had seen what happens to people who don't. I told him I understood the value of things that other people threw away. Julian walked over to a desk and picked up a file. He handed it to me. It was a prospectus for a new venture capital fund he was launching called Nexus Global. It was designed to acquire distressed logistics companies and rebuild them from the ground up. He told me he didn't need another analyst. He had plenty of people who could read a spreadsheet. He needed someone who understood the grit. He needed someone who could walk onto a loading dock and command respect, but who could also walk into a boardroom and silence a billionaire. He offered me a partnership, not a job, a partnership. He put a number on the table that made my head spin. It was equity. It was power. It was the kind of money that didn't just change your life, it changed your zip code, your history, and your future. I looked at the contract. I looked at Julian. I realized in that moment that he didn't care that I was a woman or that I was black, or that I didn't have a pedigree from Harvard. He cared that I had beaten him in an argument. He respected competence above all else. He was cold, yes. He was ruthless, absolutely. But he was honest. I took the pen. I signed the paper. I told him I had one condition. I wanted full autonomy on acquisition targets. I wanted the power to choose which companies we saved and which ones we dismantled. He agreed without hesitation. We shook hands. His grip was firm, his skin cool. There was a spark there, not romantic, not yet, but the electric charge of two predators recognizing each other in the wild. We ordered dinner to the suite and spent the next 4 hours mapping out a strategy to dominate the North American logistics market. As we went through the list of potential acquisitions, my finger paused on a name in the Southwest region. A small, failing trucking company in Phoenix with a mountain of debt and a history of safety violations. The owner was listed as Darius Vance. I looked at the name. I felt a cold, dark satisfaction curl in my stomach. I looked at Julian. I pointed to the name. I told him this was the first one I wanted. I told him it was a personal project. Julian didn't ask why. He didn't ask for the financials. He just looked at the look in my eye, and he nodded. He told me to go get it. That night I walked back to my own hotel room feeling like I was floating. I wasn't just Nia anymore. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a partner at Nexus Global. I had the backing of a billionaire, and I had a target. The climb was over. The hunt was about to begin. I went to the window and looked at the city lights, thinking about the dusty girl who had begged for a ride 3 years ago. She was gone. In her place was a woman who could buy the whole damn highway. 3 years is a lifetime in the world of high finance. It is enough time to build an empire, or to watch one crumble into dust. For me, it was enough time to shed every last remnant of the woman who had cried in a gas station parking lot. I was no longer Nia the warehouse worker. I was Nia the managing partner of Nexus Global, a private equity firm that terrified CEOs from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. We didn't just invest in companies, we dissected them. We found the rot, cut it out, and rebuilt the beast stronger, or we sold the parts for scrap. I had become very good at spotting the rot. I sat in the library of the penthouse Julian and I shared overlooking Central Park. The room was silent, except for the crackle of the fireplace and the soft turning of pages. Julian was sitting across from me, reviewing contracts for a merger in Tokyo. I looked at him over the rim of my wine glass. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, looking relaxed in a way that only men with 10 figures in the bank can look. On my left hand, hidden beneath the sleeve of my silk robe, was a ring. It was a 6-carat emerald-cut diamond, flawless and cold as ice. We had been engaged for 6 months, but we hadn't announced it to the press. We liked the mystery. We liked keeping the world guessing about the exact nature of our partnership. It gave us leverage. In business, information is ammunition, and we never gave ours away for free. I turned my attention back to the tablet in my lap. It was the quarterly distressed asset report, a list of companies that were defaulting on their loans and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. To most people, this list was a graveyard. To us, it was a menu. I scrolled through the sectors: manufacturing, retail, tech. My finger hovered over the logistics and transportation section. This was my domain. I knew the margins. I knew the pressure points. I swiped through the pages, scanning for opportunities. Midwest haulers impacted by fuel prices. Coastal shipping firms hit by union strikes. And then, my breath caught in my throat. It was a physical reaction, a sudden tightening of my chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the ghosts I thought I had exorcised. There, on page 47, buried in a list of small-cap failures in the Southwest region, Vance Logistics. I froze. The name stared back at me, black ink on a white screen, innocuous to anyone else but screaming to me. I tapped the file to open the detailed dossier. The address was the same yard in Phoenix where I used to sweep the floors. The owner was listed as Darius Vance. The status was marked in bold red letters: pre-foreclosure. Severe delinquency. I set my wine glass down on the marble table. My hand was trembling just slightly. I clenched it into a fist until the shaking stopped. I was not that girl anymore. I was a shark, and I had just smelled blood in the water. I began to read the financials. It was a disaster. It was a masterclass in incompetence. Without me there to manage the schedules and optimize the routes, the company had hemorrhaged money. The fuel costs were astronomical, suggesting nobody was monitoring the drivers or negotiating bulk rates. The maintenance logs were non-existent, which meant the fleet was likely falling apart. But the most damning part was the expense report. I saw line items for consulting fees, paid to a marketing firm registered to an Ashley Vance. I saw lease payments for luxury vehicles that had no business being on a trucking lot. I saw travel expenses for conferences in Miami and Cabo. They were bleeding the company dry to fund their lifestyle. They were living like kings on a castle built of sand, and the tide had finally come in. The bank holding their primary loan was looking to offload the debt. They considered it toxic. They wanted to sell the note for 40 cents on the dollar just to get it off their books. I looked up at Julian. He must have sensed the shift in my energy, because he had lowered his papers and was watching me with that intense, hawk-like gaze. "What is it?" he asked. His voice was low, calm. He knew me better than anyone. He knew when I found something I wanted. "I found an acquisition target," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. "Is it strategic?" he asked. "It's personal," I replied. Julian set his papers down completely. He stood up and walked over to my chair. He sat on the armrest and looked down at the tablet screen. He saw the name. He knew the story. I had never told him the details of the desert, but he knew Darius was the name of the man who had tried to break me. "Vance Logistics," Julian read. "They are underwater, deep. They owe the bank $2.5 million, I said, reciting the numbers from the screen. "They have missed their last 4 payments. The bank is preparing to seize the assets, but they would rather sell the paper to a collection agency to avoid the legal hassle of liquidation." "And you want to be that agency?" Julian said. It wasn't a question. "I don't just want to collect," I said, looking up at him. "I want to own the debt. I want to hold the mortgage on his house, the lien on his trucks, and the title to his life. I want to be the one who decides if he eats or starves." Julian looked at the file again. He scrolled through the details of the mismanagement. He saw the waste. He saw the stupidity. To a man like Julian, wasting potential was the ultimate sin. "It is a small fish, Nia," he said quietly. "We usually deal in billions. This is pocket change." "It's not about the money," I said. "It's about closing the loop. He thinks he got away with it. He thinks I just disappeared into the ether. He is living in a house that I paid for, driving a car that I worked for, with a woman who laughed while I begged for my life." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights of Manhattan. "I want to buy the debt, Julian. I want to buy it through a shell corporation so he doesn't see it coming. And then, I want to call the loan." Julian walked up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist and rested his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back into him, feeling the solid strength of the man who had helped me build my wings. "Do it," he whispered in my ear. "Buy it all. Burn it down." I turned in his arms and kissed him. It was a fierce kiss, sealed with the promise of retribution. Then I went to my desk. It was midnight, but the banks in Hong Kong were open and our legal team was always on call. I drafted an email to our acquisitions department. I instructed them to purchase the full debt portfolio of Vance Logistics immediately. I told them to offer the bank 50 cents on the dollar for an immediate cash closing. I told them to keep the purchaser anonymous until the paperwork was signed. I hit send. The cursor spun for a second, then the message vanished. It was done. Somewhere in a server farm, a digital transaction was initiated that would transfer the ownership of Darius's entire existence into my hands. He was sleeping in Phoenix right now, probably in the master bedroom I had decorated next to the woman who had mocked me. He had no idea that the ceiling above him was no longer his. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had just been sold to the ghost of his ex-wife. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat back down. I pulled up the contact information for Vance Logistics. I saw the email address for the CEO, DariusVanceLogistics.com. I didn't email him. Not yet. I wanted to wait until the ink was dry. I wanted to wait until I held the deed in my hand. I looked at the date on the calendar. It was almost the 3-year anniversary of that night at the gas station. It felt poetic. The universe had a sense of humor, dark and twisted, just like mine. I started planning the meeting. I wouldn't just send a letter. A letter was too impersonal. A letter allowed him to hide. No, I needed to see his face. I needed to see the moment the realization hit him. I opened a new document and began to draft a summons. I would invite him to New York. I would dangle a carrot so big, so golden, that his greed would blind him to the trap. I would offer him a partnership. I would offer him a buyout that would solve all his problems. I knew Darius. He was lazy and he was greedy. He would never question why a major firm wanted his failing company. He would just assume he was a genius who finally got his big break. I typed the subject line, Exclusive Partnership Opportunity. Nexus Global. I smiled. It was the same smile the shark gives before it breaches the water. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. Now all I had to do was wait for him to bite. And I knew with absolute certainty that he would swallow the hook whole. The email sat in my drafts folder like a loaded gun, waiting for a finger on the trigger. I had read it a dozen times to ensure the tone was perfect. It had to be professional, yet eager, the kind of corporate correspondence that smelled of money and desperation on the buyer's part. It was a formal invitation to the executive team of Vance Logistics to fly to New York City for an exclusive acquisition meeting with Nexus Global. The subject line simply read, Strategic Partnership Opportunity. I took a sip of my morning espresso, watched the sunrise reflect off the Hudson River, and clicked send. The trap was sprung. I knew exactly what was happening 3,000 miles away in the sweltering heat of Phoenix. I knew because I had access to their bank accounts, their email servers, and their credit reports. The notification would have hit Darius's phone at 9 in the morning, right as he was likely arguing with a vendor about a late payment or dodging a call from the utility company. I imagined the chime of his phone cutting through the tension of his failing office. I imagined the way his brow would furrow, then smooth out as he read the words, Nexus Global and Acquisition. For Darius and Ashley, this email was not just business. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning couple. Their trucking company was weeks away from total collapse. The fuel creditors were threatening to lien the trucks. The drivers were quitting because payroll was bouncing. They were living in a house of cards that was already on fire. But Darius, in his infinite arrogance, would not see this as a rescue mission. He would see it as recognition. He would tell himself that the big players in New York finally noticed his genius. He would believe that he had won. I watched the digital footprint of their reaction unfold in real time over the next 48 hours. It was pathetic and fascinating. First came the reply to my email typed out within 10 minutes. Darius accepted the meeting with a pompous enthusiasm, claiming his schedule was packed, but he could move some things around for such a prestigious opportunity. I almost laughed aloud in my empty office. His schedule was empty because nobody wanted to do business with him. Then came the frantic scramble to look the part. This was the most crucial element of my plan. I knew Ashley. I knew her deep-seated insecurity and her need to project an image of wealth she did not possess. They could not come to New York looking like failing business owners from the desert. They had to look like players. They had to look like they didn't need the money. My alerts started pinging. A credit inquiry on Darius's file. Denied. Another inquiry from a high-risk lender. Denied. They were desperate. They needed cash to fund the charade. Finally a hit. A secured loan from a predatory title pawnshop. They had put up the title to the only Escalade they actually owned, the one Ashley drove to yoga classes she couldn't afford. They took out $5,000 at an interest rate that should have been illegal. It was blood money, and they were going to spend it on costumes. I tracked their spending like a hawk. $500 at a luxury car rental agency in Phoenix to book a ride to the airport. $2,000 on last-minute airline tickets. They didn't buy first class because they couldn't afford it, but I knew Ashley would post a photo of the first class lounge if she could sneak in. The rest of the money went to the wardrobe. This was Ashley's department. She hit the luxury outlet malls. She bought a Gucci belt with a buckle the size of a dinner plate. She bought a pair of red-bottom shoes that were likely returned or slightly damaged. She bought a dress that screamed new money, something loud and branded. She was building a shell. She wanted to walk into my office and intimidate the New York elites with her labels. She didn't realize that in my world the wealthiest people wore unbranded cashmere and comfortable shoes. She was dressing for a rap video, not a boardroom. Darius rented a suit. He went to a high-end tuxedo shop and rented a tuxedo-style suit that was entirely inappropriate for a business meeting. It was shiny. It was tight. It made him look like a prom date, not a CEO. But in his mind, he looked like James Bond. They were constructing a fantasy version of themselves, a version where they were successful, powerful, and worthy of a multi-million-dollar buyout. I sat in my penthouse and watched their social media stories. Ashley posted a video of her packing. She laid out the outlet store clothes on the bed like they were treasures. She talked to her followers about making power moves and leveling up. She used hashtags like boss life and empire building. She didn't mention the pawned car title. She didn't mention the foreclosure notices piling up in their mailbox. She was selling a lie, and she was buying it herself. They landed at JFK Airport on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had a car service waiting for them, but not the one they expected. I sent a standard sedan, not a limousine. I wanted to prick their ego just enough to make them work harder for my approval. I watched the GPS tracker as the car moved through Queens and into Manhattan. They checked into a boutique hotel in Soho. It was trendy, expensive, and completely out of their budget. I knew they put the deposit on a credit card that was $5 away from its limit. The night before the meeting, my surveillance showed they went out to dinner at a steakhouse known for being overpriced and flashy. They ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. They were celebrating a deal that hadn't happened yet. They were toasting to a future that belonged to me. I could picture them clinking glasses, laughing about how they had fooled the world, how they were about to be rich. They probably talked about me. They probably laughed about the dusty ex-wife who vanished. They had no idea I was the one paying for their steak in a roundabout way by owning the debt they were racking up. I slept soundly that night. The next morning I arrived at the Nexus Global offices at 6. I dressed with military precision. A charcoal gray suit, sharp and minimalist. No jewelry except my engagement ring, which I turned inward to hide the stone. I wanted to be a blank slate. I wanted to be a mirror that reflected their own inadequacy back at them. I checked the security feeds at 9:45. A black car pulled up to the building. Darius and Ashley stepped out. They looked like caricatures. Ashley was struggling with her heels on the wet pavement, clutching her bag like a shield. Darius was adjusting his shiny suit, looking up at the skyscraper with a hunger that made him look predatory and small. They walked into the lobby. Ashley snapped at the receptionist immediately. I heard her voice over the audio feed. She demanded to be taken to the executive suite instantly. She complained about the humidity ruining her hair. She was nervous, and she was covering it with aggression. They were escorted to the elevator. I watched them in the metal box as they ascended 40 floors. Darius was checking his reflection in the mirrored walls, practicing his smile. Ashley was reapplying lipstick, checking her teeth. They looked at each other and high-fived. It was a gesture of pure greed. They thought they had made it to the finish line. The elevator doors opened on my floor. My assistant, a young woman named Sarah who knew the plan, greeted them. She told them the managing partner would be with them shortly. She offered them water. Ashley asked for sparkling water with lime. Darius asked for espresso. They sat in the waiting area trying to look bored, trying to look like they belonged in a room where the furniture cost more than their company's annual revenue. I watched them from my office monitor. I saw Darius's leg shaking. I saw Ashley checking the price tags on the magazines on the coffee table. The mask was slipping. The financial pressure was crushing them, and they were holding on to this meeting like a life raft. They were terrified that if this deal didn't go through, they would go back to Phoenix and lose everything. They were right to be terrified. I took a deep breath. I spun my chair around to face the window, looking out at the gray sky over the river. I placed my hands on the armrests. I was calm. I was cold. I was ready. I pressed the intercom button. "Send them in," I said. The door handle turned. The heavy wood swung open. I heard their footsteps on the carpet. I heard the rustle of their rented clothes. I heard Darius inhale, preparing to launch into the pitch of his life. He was walking into a room filled with his own lies, and I was the truth, waiting in the chair. The hunt was over. The trap had snapped shut. Now it was time to skin the prey. The security monitors in my office were high-definition 4,000-pixel windows into the souls of the people standing 40 floors below me. I watched the feed like a hawk circling its prey. The lobby of Nexus Global was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of Italian marble, brushed steel, and silence. It was a space that whispered money rather than screaming it. And into this cathedral of commerce walked Darius and Ashley, looking like they had dressed for a music video shoot that had run out of budget. I zoomed in on the camera feed. Ashley was wearing a dress that I recognized from a discount luxury outlet website. On the model, it had looked elegant. On her, under the unforgiving glare of the lobby lights, the fabric looked stiff, and the fit was all wrong, bunching at the waist where she had clearly pinned it. She was tugging at the hem, trying to smooth out wrinkles that were permanent. She wore sunglasses indoors, large frames with a gold logo on the side that I knew was plastic. She looked around the lobby, not with appreciation, but with a sneer of defensive insecurity. She was terrified that she did not belong, so she was preparing to act like she owned the place to compensate. Darius looked worse. The suit was a size too small in the shoulders, restricting his movement like a straitjacket. He kept shooting his cuffs, trying to expose the watch he was wearing. I knew that watch. I had bought it for him 5 years ago for our anniversary using my overtime pay. It was a decent watch then, but now paired with his shiny suit and desperate energy, it looked like a prop. He was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead, even through the camera lens. He was pacing a tight circle on the rug, rehearsing his opening lines, mouthing words to the empty air, like a man praying for a miracle. They approached the reception desk. My assistant Sarah was sitting there. Sarah was 24, a brilliant graduate from Columbia who spoke 3 languages and was training to be an operations manager. To Ashley, Sarah was just the help. I turned up the volume on the audio feed. "I have an appointment with the managing partner," Darius said. His voice cracked slightly, then he cleared his throat and deepened it, trying to sound authoritative. "We are Vance Logistics. We are here to close the deal." Sarah smiled her professional, polite smile. She checked the schedule she already knew by heart. "Yes, Mr. Vance. You are a few minutes early. Please have a seat. Can I get you anything while you wait?" "Water, coffee." Ashley stepped forward, pushing her sunglasses up onto her head. She looked at Sarah with a look of pure disdain. "Water," she repeated, as if Sarah had offered her poison. "We just flew in from Phoenix. It is humid out there. I need an iced latte with oat milk and 2 pumps of vanilla. And make sure it is not too sweet." I watched Sarah's face. She did not blink. "I am sorry, ma'am," Sarah said smoothly. "We have filtered water, sparkling water, and freshly brewed black coffee. We do not have an espresso bar in the lobby." Ashley let out a loud, theatrical sigh. She turned to Darius, throwing her hands up. "Can you believe this?" she asked loudly. "We are here to sign a multi-million-dollar contract, and they cannot even get a simple coffee order right. This is basic hospitality." Darius looked nervous. He put a hand on Ashley's arm, trying to quiet her, but she shrugged him off. She leaned over the desk, invading Sarah's personal space. "Listen, sweetie," Ashley said, her voice dripping with condescension. My husband runs a transportation empire. We are used to a certain level of service. When we travel, we stay at the Four Seasons. We are not used to whatever this budget operation is. You need to find someone to go get me my coffee. Here." She reached into her purse, the fake Louis Vuitton, and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. She slapped it on the marble counter. "Keep the change." I felt a cold rage tightening my chest. It was not just the rudeness. It was the familiarity of it. This was exactly how she had treated me. She treated anyone she perceived as beneath her like a servant. She used her proximity to Darius, and by extension, the money I had earned to create a hierarchy where she was the queen and everyone else was a peasant. She had no idea that the woman she was barking orders at had a higher net worth than Darius and Ashley combined. Sarah looked at the money, then up at Ashley. She did not touch the bill. "I cannot leave the desk, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice dropping a few degrees in temperature. "But you are welcome to visit the coffee shop around the corner if you would like to get it yourself." Ashley snatched the money back. "Unbelievable," she huffed. She turned and marched to the seating area, her heels clacking loudly on the stone floor. She threw herself onto a leather sofa and crossed her arms. Darius followed her, looking apologetically at Sarah before scurrying after his wife. I watched them sit there. Ashley immediately pulled out her phone. She held it up high, finding her angle, and started recording a video for her story. I could lip read what she was saying even before the audio caught it. Just at Nexus Global HQ in NYC, she was saying, pouting her lips, "About to make some big moves. The service here is trash, but money talks, right? Boss moves only." She panned the camera to Darius, who tried to look busy on his phone, though I knew he did not have cell service in the lobby because he had not paid his bill. They were performers in a play that nobody was watching but me. I swiveled my chair away from the monitors and looked at the file on my desk. It was the purchase agreement for their debt. It was already signed by the bank. It was done. I owned them. I looked at the clock. It was 10 o'clock, exactly. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah," I said. "Send them up." I saw Sarah on the monitor pick up the phone at the desk. I saw her look over at Darius and Ashley. "Mr. Vance," she said, "the managing partner is ready for you now. Please take the elevator to the 40th floor." Darius jumped up so fast he almost knocked over the coffee table. He buttoned his jacket, then unbuttoned it, then buttoned it again. He ran a hand over his head. He looked terrified. Ashley stood up slower, smoothing her dress. She put her sunglasses back on her face indoors as if she were a celebrity avoiding the paparazzi. They walked to the elevators. As the doors closed on them, shutting them into the metal box that would bring them to their judgment day, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the cold precision of business. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the corner of my office. I checked my appearance. My hair was sharp. My suit was armor. My eyes were clear. I was not the girl they left at the gas station. I was the consequence of their actions. I walked over to the large conference table and sat down in the chair at the head facing away from the door. I swiveled it around so I was looking out the window at the skyline, my back to the room. I wanted them to walk in and see the view first. I wanted them to see the world they desperately wanted to be part of, the world they thought they could buy with fake diamonds and bad attitudes. I heard the elevator ding in the hallway. I heard the heavy thud of the double doors opening. I heard the click of Ashley's heels on the plush carpet of the executive suite. I heard Darius breathing a heavy, nervous sound. "Wow," Ashley whispered. "Look at this view. This is it, Darius. We made it." "Hello," Darius called out, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "We are here for the meeting." I did not turn around. Not yet. I let the silence stretch. I let them stand there in their rented clothes, staring at the back of my chair, wondering who the wizard behind the curtain was. I wanted them to feel small. I wanted them to feel the weight of the space they were invading. "Please sit down," I said to the window. My voice was calm, low, and unrecognizable to them. It had been 3 years, and my voice had changed. It had dropped an octave hardened by command and authority. They did not know it was me. They just heard a boss. I heard the scrape of chairs as they sat. I heard the rustle of papers as Darius pulled out his pathetic business plan. "Thank you for seeing us," Darius said. "We are very excited about the synergy between our companies. Vance Logistics is poised for explosive growth. We just need the right strategic partner to scale." I smiled at my reflection in the glass. Synergy, explosive growth, buzzwords from a man who could not even keep the lights on. Darius cleared his throat, a nervous, wet sound that betrayed the bravado he was trying to project. He began to speak, his voice pitching lower, adopting the smooth, practiced cadence of a man who believes he can charm his way out of a burning building. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a somber, reverent whisper, "building this company has been more than just a business endeavor for me. It has been a journey of healing, a journey of survival. I built Vance Logistics on a foundation of absolute integrity and family values because family is all we have left when tragedy strikes." I tightened my grip on the armrests until my knuckles turned white. I knew what was coming. I had anticipated his lies, but I was not prepared for the sheer suffocating audacity of hearing him weaponize my own existence. 3 years ago, Darius continued, the sorrow in his voice thick enough to choke on, I suffered an unimaginable loss. My wife, my beautiful Nia, was taken from me. It was a freak accident during a road trip. She wandered off during a stop we searched for days. The authorities said it was exposure. They never found well, it destroyed me. I was broken. I almost gave up on everything. But I knew Nia would want me to carry on. She would want me to build a legacy. So I poured my grief into this company. Every truck on the road, every shipment delivered, it is a tribute to her memory. I built this empire from the ashes of my broken heart, guided by the principles of honesty she taught me. I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea. He was erasing me. He was rewriting the story of his cruelty into a hero's journey where I was just a tragic plot device. He had turned the woman he abandoned in the dust into a saintly ghost to sell a failing trucking company. He was selling my death to the highest bidder. The rage that had fueled me for 3 years coalesced into a cold, hard diamond in my chest. He was not just a liar, he was a ghoul. He was feasting on the corpse of the marriage he had murdered. He paused, waiting for the sympathy that usually followed such a revelation. He expected the faceless investor in the chair to turn around with tears in their eyes, moved by his resilience. He expected a hug and a check. Instead, I remained motionless. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until the air in the room felt thin and dangerous. I watched a ferry cut through the water below, leaving a white wake that vanished as quickly as it appeared. That was what Darius hoped I was. A wake, a disturbance that had faded. Then Ashley spoke. Her voice shattered the solemn atmosphere Darius had tried to construct, sharp and impatient like breaking glass. "It was a terrible time, truly." She interjected, the clinking of her bracelets echoing in the room as she gestured dismissively. Darius was a mess. Someone had to step up. That is where I came in. I sacrificed my own high-powered career in fashion to help him stabilize the family and the business. It was not easy stepping into that void, taking on the burden of a grieving family, but that is what we do. We support each other. I listened to her rewrite history with the same casual arrogance she had used to mock my clothes at the gas station. Her high-powered career had been a string of unpaid internships and retail jobs she was fired from. Her sacrifice was spending my savings on spa days while I worked double shifts. "Look." Ashley continued, her tone shifting from performative sympathy to aggressive entitlement. "We have told you our story. You see the value we bring. We are resilient. We are survivors. But we are also very busy people. We have other investors lining up. We flew all the way here because we heard Nexus Global closes deals fast. We need to see the contract now." She tapped her fake acrylic nails on the table, a rapid staccato rhythm. "Honestly, we do not have all day to sit here staring at the back of your head," she snapped, her patience evaporating. My husband has literally worked himself to the bone to keep this family afloat after his first wife died. He deserves this payout. We deserve this. Our time is extremely valuable. We have a dinner reservation at Le Bernardin at 8 and I need to change. So let us cut the theatrics. Are you buying the company or not? The disrespect was breathtaking. She was sitting in the office of a multi-billion-dollar firm, speaking to a managing partner, and she was checking her watch because she wanted to go eat a dinner she could not afford. She was using the death of the woman she bullied to guilt-trip a stranger into making her rich. It was time. I reached out and pressed the button on my desk phone. A soft chime sounded in the room. "Sarah," I said into the intercom, my voice low and distorted by the speaker system. "Please lock the conference room doors from the outside, cancel my next meeting, and call security. Tell them to stand by on the executive floor." I heard the heavy click of the electronic locks engaging. The sound was final. It was the sound of a cage door slamming shut. Behind me, I heard Darius shift in his chair. I heard the rustle of Ashley's dress stopping abruptly. "Did you say lock the doors?" Darius asked, his voice trembling slightly. The salesman facade cracking to reveal the coward underneath. "Excuse me, why are you locking us in?" I placed my hands on the leather armrests of my chair. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive polish and conditioned air, the scent of the life I had built from the dirt up. I pressed my foot against the floor. I was ready to show them what a ghost looked like. I placed my hands on the cool leather armrests of the executive chair. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive polish and conditioned air, the scent of the life I had built from the dirt up. I pressed my foot against the floor and slowly, deliberately began to turn. The mechanism was smooth and silent. As I rotated, the gray Hudson River and the city skyline slid away, replaced by the interior of the boardroom. I saw them. Darius sweating in his rental suit, eyes wide with confusion. Ashley, mouth open, hand frozen halfway to her sunglasses. They looked small. They looked cheap. They looked like dust. I completed the turn and locked eyes with Darius. I did not blink. I did not smile. I just let him see me. I let him see the woman he left to die. I let him see the ghost he had tried to sell. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. His jaw went slack. He made a sound, a strangled whimper that died in his throat. "Hello, husband," I said. "I hear I am dead." Darius dropped his pen. It hit the mahogany table with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the floor, but he had nowhere to go. The doors were locked. He was trapped in a glass cage with the monster he had created. He looked from me to the door and back to me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. It was as if his brain refused to process the visual information in front of him. He was looking at a dead woman. He was looking at the dusty wife he had discarded, but she was wearing a suit that cost more than his car, and sitting in a chair that signified absolute power. Ashley made a noise that sounded like a tea kettle beginning to boil. She pulled her sunglasses down her nose, her hands trembling so violently that her bracelets rattled together. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. She looked at my face, then at the diamond on my finger, then at the nameplate on the desk that read, "Nia Sterling, Managing Partner." The realization hit her in waves. First confusion, then recognition, then a terrifying dawning comprehension of just how much trouble she was in. "Nia," Darius whispered. His voice was a rasp. "You. It is you. But how? We left you. You were gone." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I kept my face impassive, a mask of cold judgment. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I wanted them to feel my indifference. "You left me," I repeated. "Yes, you did. You left me with 4% battery and $20. And now you are sitting in my office trying to sell me a company that I already own, using a story about my own death to close the deal. It is bold, Darius. I will give you that. It is incredibly stupid, but it is bold." Darius stood up. His legs were shaking. He wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He tried to smile, but it looked like a rictus of pain. He was a salesman to his core, and even in the face of the impossible, his instinct was to spin, to charm, to lie. "Nia, baby, listen," he stammered, taking a step toward the table. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender that felt more like a plea. "You have it all wrong. We did not leave you. We got lost. We turned around. I swear to God, Nia, we drove back. We looked for you for hours. We were screaming your name in the desert. We thought you wandered off. We were heartbroken." He was gaslighting me. Even now, with the evidence of his cruelty sitting right in front of him, he was trying to rewrite reality. He was trying to make me doubt my own memory of the taillights fading into the dust. He was trying to turn himself into the victim of a tragic misunderstanding. "Stop," I said. The word was soft, but it cut through his lies like a blade. "Do not insult me, Darius. Do not stand there in your rented suit and lie to the woman who balances the books. I know you did not come back. I know because I watched you leave, and I know you did not mourn me." Ashley stood up now, finding her footing. She smoothed the front of her ill-fitting dress, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a hidden camera. She decided to take a different approach. She decided to be the peacemaker, the sister she never was. She forced a smile onto her face, a grotesque imitation of warmth. "Nia?" "Oh my God," she said, her voice high and breathless. "We are just in shock. Can you blame us? We thought we lost you. We grieved you, Nia, truly. We are family, sisters. Look at us now. We are all here together. We can fix this. We can put the past behind us. We are so happy you are successful. This is amazing. We should celebrate." She took a step toward me, reaching out a hand as if to touch me, as if to bridge the gap with false intimacy. "Do not touch me," I said. Ashley froze. Her hand hovered in the air, then dropped to her side. "Family," I asked. "Sisters. You called me Dusty Ashley. You told me I was embarrassing you. You laughed while I ran after the car. Is that how you treat family? Or is family just a word you use when you need someone to pay your credit card bill?" Ashley flushed. A splotchy red stain crept up her neck. She looked at Darius for help, but he was staring at the floor, defeated. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. The mask of friendliness slipped, revealing the petty, jealous woman underneath. "That was a long time ago," she snapped. "It was a joke. You were always too sensitive. You never knew how to take a joke. And now look at you. You think because you married some rich guy and got a fancy office that you are better than us. You are still the same Nia. You are just wearing a costume." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, born of pure amusement at her delusion. She thought I married into this. She thought I was a trophy wife. She could not conceive of a world where I earned this chair on my own. "A costume," I repeated. "That is interesting coming from you, Ashley. Because I am looking at you, and I see a woman wearing a dress that does not belong to her." Ashley looked down at her dress. "What are you talking about?" "This is designer." "It is a Halston," I said. "Retail price $450. But you did not buy it. You rented it from the Luxe Closet. I know this because my firm handles the logistics for their return center, and I know that this specific dress was due back 3 days ago. You are racking up late fees, Ashley. $50 a day." Her mouth fell open. She clutched the fabric of her skirt as if trying to hide it, and that bag, I continued, pointing to the fake Louis Vuitton on the table. "It is a decent replica, I will give you that. Canal Street. Or maybe you ordered it online, but the stitching on the handle is wrong, and the hardware is tarnishing. Real gold does not turn green, Ashley." Darius looked at Ashley. He looked at the dress. He looked at the bag. He looked like he was realizing for the first time that his entire life was a counterfeit. "How do you know all this?" Darius whispered. "Because I make it my business to know," I said. "I know everything, Darius. I know about the second mortgage you took out on the house I paid for. I know about the title loan on the Escalade. I know you haven't paid your drivers in 6 weeks. I know you are drowning, and I know you came here today hoping for a miracle." Darius sank back into his chair. He put his head in his hands. "We are broke, Nia," he admitted, his voice muffled. "We are going to lose everything." "I know," I said. "That is why I bought you." Darius looked up, his eyes bloodshot and confused. "Bought us?" He repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. I stood up and walked around the table, my heels sinking silently into the plush carpet. I stood over them, looming in the silence, casting a shadow that swallowed their small, rented existence. "I did not buy your company, Darius," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "I bought your debt. Every single cent of it. I own the note on your trucks. I own the lien on your house. I own the credit card debt Ashley used to buy those red-bottom shoes she is wearing right now. You do not owe the bank anymore. You owe me." The color that had drained from his face did not return. He looked sick, a greenish hue taking over his complexion. Ashley gripped her fake bag until her knuckles turned white. You can't do that," she stammered, her voice shrill with panic. "That's illegal." "It is perfectly legal," I assured her. "It is called a distressed asset acquisition, and you, my dear, are very distressed." I walked back to my desk and picked up a thick file folder. I tossed it onto the table in front of them. It slid across the polished wood with a hiss and stopped right at Darius's fingertips. "Open it," I commanded. Darius opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were copies of the loan documents, the transfer of ownership papers, and a forensic accounting report of his company's finances that painted a picture of absolute negligence. "Turn to page 4, I instructed. He turned the page. His eyes scanned the document, darting back and forth. He stopped at a highlighted paragraph. This says you are calling the loans," he said, his voice trembling so hard the paper shook. "Immediate repayment." "That is correct," I said. "You are in default on 3 separate covenants. I am exercising my right as the creditor to demand full repayment of the principal and interest. $2.4 million, payable immediately. Do you have a checkbook, Darius? Or should I just take the cash out of your wallet?" "We don't have that kind of money," Ashley screamed, jumping to her feet. "We don't have any money." "I know," I said calmly. "Which means I am seizing the collateral." "Collateral?" Darius asked, looking up with the eyes of a trapped animal. "Your assets," I said, ticking them off on my fingers. "The trucks, the warehouse, the inventory, and your personal residence, which you foolishly used to secure the business loan you took out last year to pay for your marketing expenses. I am taking the house, Darius. The house I bought. The house I decorated. The house you kicked me out of." "No," Ashley whimpered, sinking back into her chair. "Not the house. Where will we live?" I sat back down in my chair and swiveled slightly, looking at them with a detached curiosity like a scientist observing specimens in a jar. "I believe there is a Motel 6 on the outskirts of Phoenix," I said. "Or maybe you can sleep in the Escalade. Oh wait, I forgot. You pawned the title to that too. And according to my repo team, they are scheduled to pick it up at JFK Airport the moment you land, assuming you can afford the flight back." Darius stood up again. Anger flashed in his eyes, the cornered rat finally showing its teeth. He slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do this," he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "We are still married. New York is an equitable distribution state. If you made this money while we were married, half of it is mine. I will sue you. I will take half of this company. I will drag you through court until you have nothing left." I smiled. I had been waiting for this. This was the moment I had prepared for. "I thought you might say that," I said. Just then the boardroom door opened. Julian walked in. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. He owned the building. He was wearing a navy suit that cost more than Darius's entire life earnings. He walked straight to me, put a hand on my shoulder, and kissed my cheek. "Is everything in order, darling?" he asked, his voice smooth and deep. Darius looked at Julian, then at me. "Who is this?" "This is my fiancé," Julian said, looking at Darius like he was a bug on his shoe. And you must be the mistake she made in her 20s. This is none of your business, Darius snarled. This is between me and my wife. I am entitled to her assets. I pulled another document from my drawer and slid it across the table. This is a copy of your tax returns from the last 3 years, Darius, I said. You filed as single. You claimed head of household. You signed a federal document stating you were unmarried to maximize your deductions and qualify for a specific business grant. Darius froze, his mouth hung open. And this, I said, sliding a second paper forward, is the marriage license you signed with Ashley in Cabo San Lucas last year. You committed bigamy, Darius. You married her while you were still legally married to me. You committed perjury on federal tax forms. That invalidates any claim you think you have to my assets. It also happens to be a felony. 2 felonies, actually. Fraud and bigamy. Ashley looked at Darius with pure horror. You told me the divorce went through, she screamed, hitting him on the arm. You told me she signed the papers. You showed me the decree. I forged it, Darius yelled back at her, his facade completely crumbling. I didn't know where she was. I couldn't serve her papers if she was dead. I had to move on. You lied to everyone, I said, my voice cutting through their domestic dispute. And now the bill is due. I pressed the intercom button again. Security, I said. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Vance out of the building and have the legal team send the eviction notice to their address in Phoenix. Effective immediately. Also call the NYPD Economic Crimes Division. I have some files they might be interested in. 2 large security guards entered the room. They were former linebackers, massive men in black suits who didn't look like they were in the mood for a debate. Darius looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, no charm, no high-class posturing, just a man realizing he had thrown away a diamond to pick up a rock and now the rock was dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. Nia, please, he begged, tears actually welling in his eyes. We have nothing, no car, no house, no money. How are we supposed to get home? How are we supposed to survive? I stood up and walked to the window, turning my back on them, just as they had turned their backs on me at that gas station 3 years ago. I looked out at the city I had conquered, the skyline that I now helped shape. Walk, I said. It is good exercise. And Darius? I added, glancing over my shoulder. Try not to look too dusty on the way out. It ruins the aesthetic of my building. I heard the guards step forward. I heard Ashley sobbing, a high, thin sound of total despair. I heard Darius pleading, his voice fading as they were dragged into the hallway. And then I heard the heavy doors close, sealing them out of my world forever. I felt Julian's hand take mine. He squeezed it gently. It is done, he said softly. It is done, I repeated. I watched from the window as 2 small figures emerged onto the sidewalk 40 floors below. They stood there for a moment, arguing, pointing fingers at each other. Ashley threw her fake bag on the ground. Darius put his head in his hands. They looked around for a car that wasn't there, for a life that didn't exist anymore. Then slowly they started walking toward the subway station, blending into the crowd, just 2 more dusty people in a city of millions. I turned away from the window and looked at Julian. I looked at the ring on my finger. I looked at the office I had built. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt clean. I had scrubbed off the dust of my past, and underneath I was shining. Ready for lunch? I asked. Always, Julian said. We walked out of the boardroom together, leaving the empty chairs and the ghost of my past behind us. The elevator opened, and we stepped in, going up. The most powerful revenge is not destruction, but transformation. Nia's journey proves that your worth is never defined by those who cannot afford to value you. When they left her in the dust, they didn't realize they were planting a seed that would grow into an empire. True power isn't about wearing expensive labels or pretending to be high class. It is about having the quiet confidence to build a life that no one can take away from you. Sometimes you have to be abandoned to realize you were the only one holding yourself up all along. If you believe success is the best revenge, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth.